we've created a financial instrument, which is a home sharing equity agreement, digitized it, tokenized it, and enabled someone to access the equity in their home without debt. So by doing this, we're allowing them to access what's rightfully theirs. It's their home, they've paid into it, they own it outright. And what we do is we create a marketplace for investors, because from an investor perspective, it's not easy to invest in real estate. It's got a lot of what we refer to as sweat equity. You got to buy in a place outright. You've got to manage that place. You've got to worry about occupancy. You got to worry about maintenance. You got to worry about taxes. We've eliminated that out of the equation.
Real estate investments and ownership market has been growing, but it comes with a number of challenges pertaining to equity financing options. Vesta Equity has been built with the purpose to disrupt the multi-trillion-dollar property equity finance market. There are a number of barriers like significant loan costs and risks for property owners and roadblocks for property investors. Hence, Vesta Equity is focused on revolutionizing the home equity finance space by providing homeowners with the tools to control their home equity outside of the traditional home equity finance options. To discuss the venture, we have Michael with us today. Michael is the founder and CEO of Vesta Equity and is an entrepreneurial executive with 20 plus years of experience rich in sales, marketing, product development, and managing end-to-end customer lifecycle. Welcome to CuratedX, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you with us today and really look forward to an enriching conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate joining your world and talking to you about W3 and conveying what we're doing to your audience. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. So to get things started, I'd like to understand Vesta Equity first. So if you can shed some light on Vesta Equity, what is the problem you're trying to solve and how did you come up with this idea?
That's a good question. So a number of years ago, I started getting interested in blockchain and the use case of blockchain. Not necessarily the cryptocurrency side of the equation. I felt that it has its place in the ecosystem, but I was more interested in how could this technology change the paradigm or models of certain industries and certain verticals. And at that time, I was actually interested in home financing for a couple of reasons. I had gone through and read a whole bunch of articles on reverse mortgages. And in North America, reverse mortgages are highly predatory and unfair to people of a certain age, 65 and over. And I thought, wow, there's got to be a better solution for these older people who want to access the equity in their home without lots of risks and lots of problems and lots of costs. Because if you look at the data, most Americans, with the exception of the top 1%, have their wealth in their home.
Right.
And at some point in time, they need to access it. And really the only way to access cash in your home, and if you sort of pull out and look at it from a 30,000 foot perspective, if you own a home, the only way to access the cash in that home is by borrowing against that asset or selling it outright, both of which have a lot of inequities, both of which have a lot of costs. And a lot of people, of a certain age also want to retire in place. They don't want to necessarily sell their home and move. That's a highly disruptive element to your life and can be really emotionally draining when someone's older, and if they have to access the equity in their home for a specific health reason or other reasons, the last thing you want to do is add a move onto that. But this is applicable across the board. I mean, if I walked up to you and said, I have $350,000 in cash and I want to spend it, and my financial institution told me, no, sorry, you can't spend that cash. You have to borrow against it or spend it all right, completely full spend it. That's the only way to access it. Most people would say that's insane. But that's exactly what we do with real estate in North America and globally. We make it inaccessible. It's been highly institutionalized. And we started looking at this and saying to ourselves, there's got to be a better way. So coupled with my sort of early inclination towards blockchain and taking a look at blockchain and seeing what you could do with blockchain and applying it into home equity, you can tokenize an asset, right? And you can take that physical asset and create a sort of digital version of it, digital representation of it. And what we've done is we've created a financial instrument, which is a home sharing equity agreement, digitized it, tokenized it, and enabled someone to access the equity in their home without debt. So by doing this, we're allowing them to access what's rightfully theirs. It's their home, they've paid into it, they own it outright. And what we do is we create a marketplace for investors, because from an investor perspective, it's not easy to invest in real estate. It's got a lot of what we refer to as sweat equity. You got to buy in a place outright. You've got to manage that place. You've got to worry about occupancy. You got to worry about maintenance. You got to worry about taxes. We've eliminated that out of the equation. So the homeowner sells the equity through the shared equity agreement to an investor, and then the investor partakes in the upside appreciation in the home. So we eliminate debt for appreciation and create a marketplace, and we allow investors to build a portfolio of assets like they would stocks. And we've made it that simple. Point and click, and you can own $5,000 of a property in Orange County, California, $5,000 of a property in Dade County, Florida, or New York State, or Colorado, or Idaho, and eventually globally. What we want to be able to do is allow someone in Australia to buy assets anywhere in the world, someone in Dubai to buy assets anywhere in the world. And they can add that to their portfolio, and it adds balance to a portfolio. Real estate's a great hedge against inflation. It's consistent. It's a sort of an asset that appreciates in value over time, and it's not subject to the volatility of stocks and other assets. So it adds balance to your portfolio. And if you look at the portfolios of highly successful investors, they always have real estate in there. Now what we've done is made it 100% accessible for everyone 24/7.
Wonderful. And I think that that's the whole gist of it, right? Fractionalization and tokenization of assets, bringing it to the digital world and making it accessible for a larger audience, simplifying the basics of the challenge. So you figured out that gap in the market and quickly went on to solve that customer pain point. I think that it's a very interesting business model with the key stakeholders in the business framework being owners, investors, and having a marketplace to bring them together. I think it's really, really interesting. So just probably moving on from there, I also understand that home equity dealings involve substantial amounts of funds moving from one party to the other, and with the number of hacks happening across protocols in Web3, right? I'd love to understand, how is the safety and security of funds ensured by the platform of Vesta Equity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually never touch the funds. So funds are in people's individual wallets. We don't touch anyone's capital. We don't touch the assets. We're a facilitator. So each user has their wallet. So each homeowner would have their own wallet, and then each investor has their own wallet. They can bring their own wallet in as long as it's Algorand compliant. And that Algorand works with the Algorand ecosystem. So we do it and structure it that way so that we're never actually touching any cash. So now, unless someone turns around and somehow gives up the keys to their wallet or does something, irresponsible, they may end up having something happen with their wallet. However, it's not easy to crack a wallet. Someone may crack one wallet, the whole ecosystem doesn't collapse. They've just cracked that wallet and that's it, because it's independent, it's completely decentralized. So there's very little risk to sort of like a system-wide hack. This is one of the beautiful things of decentralized finance platforms like ours, is that nothing is centralized. The only information that's centralized is data information, basic data on the transaction, which is on the blockchain, which is immutable. But being able to hack into a system-wide sort of ecosystem like we've seen in the past with banks and credit cards and other types of information that people can get into, with our platform, that's not going to happen because of the nature and structure of the platform. So it's actually way more secure. Now, people still have to take personal responsibility for their own information. And that's the case with everything. I mean, if I walk around and give up my PIN code to my bank card, well, the likelihood is someone's going to access my bank account. So you still have to take that into consideration as an individual user. But these traditional hacks you've seen are much, much harder and almost impossible in many respects when it comes to a decentralized financial platform.
Absolutely. And I think it is also very important that you ensure that safety and security is maintained, and Vesta Equity doesn't even come close to handling those funds. So all the responsibility stays with the wallet holder, with the user, and it gives them the ease and comfort of dealing on the platform as well.
Yeah, and we also have a rigorous onboarding process. So if a homeowner is coming onto the platform, they have to go through a DID, which is a digital ID verification, KYC, and AML process. And then their home goes through a whole verification process. And there's a whole process whereby we verify their ownership, We ensure that they're the actual owner of the home. We ensure that the home is insured. We ensure that the taxes are all paid. So there's a very rigorous process to onboard a homeowner before they're actually on the platform. The same goes for investors. They have to go through DID, KYC, and AML process. Now, part of that's also a regulatory issue, but it's also a security issue. We know exactly who we're dealing with on both ends of the spectrum, and that adds to the security element as well. You're not bringing any potentially fraudulent characters or fraudulent players into the ecosystem. They've all been very, very well verified.
Absolutely, which is, like you said, I think it's fascinating, and it is important that you take care of that part as well, because you need to ensure even one loophole in the system gives a bad shape to what you're trying to achieve as a larger objective. And at the very beginning, you need to lay the grounds clear. Yes, real estate and all of these aspects of home equity financing are backed with a lot of regulations and legalities around it, but ensuring the best way forward of having those basic security checks in place takes you a long way in scaling as well. I'd just like to pick up on another thing that you mentioned about the Algorand network as well, right? So I think there is this another crucial aspect when building a platform, which is essentially maybe selecting the infra or the layer one to build on, or maybe it could be partnering with different stakeholders for varied solutions. So are there any such key partnerships and integrations that you would want to highlight?
Well, Algorand is a core integration for us because that's the basis of our platform. We're using their technology, their blockchain solution. We have partnerships with third-party players like Passbase and others that do the KYC, AML process, North Capital, which does accreditation and other functionalities. But as far as those back-end solutions, it's all API driven, and they're technology partners we vetted that, are well established in their ecosystem. Like Circle is one of our partners because everything on our platform is based on USDC. There's no cryptocurrencies and the speculation related to cryptocurrency. We use a stable coin because it's the appreciation of the real asset, which is the physical property that the owners brought onto the platform, that has to increase in value. In that sense, we don't want any speculation of any other cryptocurrencies that have their own ecosystem and their own sort of like lifespan, and when they go up and down in terms of values. So Circle is a key partner of ours as well. We really went out to try to find what we felt were best of class in each category that we had to work with on the back end, because we wanted a very robust, scalable platform. And also from a security perspective, we were dealing with companies like Circle, companies like Algorand. If you look at Algorand's history, never any downtime. Not once, and that will continue because of the basic infrastructure they've laid out and how they process these transactions. Very, very different than you would have with an Ethereum or a Bitcoin or other platforms that are out there using those various technologies.
And it is a very critical aspect specifically when it comes to home equity financing. It is very important to keep those checks and balances, have those very key partnerships with robust ecosystems. So it takes you a long way in scaling the platform and having more investors and even more homeowners onboarded to the platform as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah, moving on from there. So real estate, as we know, involves a lot of regulations, documentation, legalities across jurisdictions. And also, like we did mention about it, it becomes a little tough in terms of getting those equity financing because there is not too much of liquidity on those lines as well. So do you see any roadblocks, maybe from a legal standpoint, which could hamper the long-term success of the project? And what are your plans for mitigating these risks?
Well, from the get-go, we decided that we had to be regulatory compliant, and we are. We haven't approached this with the idea that we can thumb our nose at the regulators and just say, this is different. We don't care that your rules are there. So basically, to hell with you. We're going to move on and create our own business model here that basically thumbs the nose at the regulators and the rules. So we are regulatory compliant. So every asset that comes onto the platform is securitized under right now Regulation D, which means for the interim period, we can only sell to accredited investors within the United States. Outside the United States, we can sell to non-accredited investors. We decided to do this because we felt that that was the best approach. If the business model could work under a regulatory environment, then it can work as regulations evolve and change. And it's our belief that, the regulators, FINRA, the SEC, and others are going to, over time, realize that these digital assets make sense. But fair to them, they need to see it work first, right? And if they've created a regulatory environment, and we could argue back and forth, and I've heard plenty of arguments that the rules are outdated, the rules don't make any sense to us. The fact is, those are the rules. Follow them. And if your business works within those rules, great. And if you can then work and engage with the regulators over time to adapt those rules, you've got something to show them that you are building a model that makes sense, that's fair and equitable to people. And that's exactly what we've done. I don't buy into these businesses that say, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to get away with it. You're not. The SEC can shut you down for 6 months while they review your business. And during that time, there's no transactions. So our approach was to be regulatory compliant. So right now we're doing everything under Reg D. And then eventually we're going to do everything under Reg A, so we can open it up to retail investors. If you drill down to sort of local level, when you start dealing with the actual property transactions and titles and stuff like that, that's still an industry that's very, for lack of a better word, very analog. We still do some of those processes manually. We do file, even though there's a digital footprint and a digital element to our entire business, there is still an analog-based back end to our business where we still have to file locally with local offices and whatnot. It's what you have to do. And until those offices become digital and those offices start seeing, wow, that's on the blockchain, that makes a lot of sense. It's now digital. There's proof. It's immutable. I don't need to worry about filing the paperwork anymore. And some local offices are very, very old school. They still want everything filed. They want everything notarized. They actually want a wet signature, which means they need a real signature, not a digital signature. But that's all going to evolve over time. And it's simply something that's going to improve and get better. And by taking what we feel is a leadership position and showing them, hey, we'll comply and we'll do what you need to do, but also take a look at this. This is all digital. It's an immutable record of this transaction. We've also gone to very significant extent to make everything very simple for both the homeowner as well as the investor. And our contracts are very simple. They're very straightforward. They're very reader friendly. I don't want someone to look at our contract and go, oh my God, I got to hire a lawyer and work on this with a lawyer for 10 days. No, our contracts are very simple. They're very straightforward. There's no loopholes. There's no odd language. It's simple, straightforward contracts that people can easily understand. And those will eventually be 100% translated over into a smart contract over time. As smart contract technology evolves and the level of complication you can put in a smart contract develops, those eventually will all be on the smart contracts. Right now, smart contracts are relatively simple tools that we use and enable on the platform, but eventually over time, those are going to become much more dynamic.
Right, definitely. And I think it's only wise to be under that regulatory framework, ensure that you're building, keeping that very important aspect in mind. Then you have a strong footing, you're building with strength, and only then you can showcase, okay, this is the strength of digital assets, how we're leveraging it, and how we've been under the regulatory framework and built something out of it.
Exactly.
Really like your point on that front. And taking that forward, I'd like to congratulate you on the recent seed financing, which was backed by global VCs, industry partners, and angel investors. So on the fundraise, if you can highlight the need specifically, how are you intending to use those funds? And a very interesting point I'd like to hear from you would be around the importance of valuable VCs and investors in this regard.
That's a great question, because first of all, how we're using the funds, we've built the team. So the funds have been deployed. We've built the team. We've hired in people in key areas, product development, programmers, and our technology infrastructure, marketing, business development. We've brought all those key people in. That's how part of the funding is being deployed. Part of the funding is being also deployed for product development. We went to market with a product that allows a homeowner who owns 100% equity of their home to access the equity very simply and very easily. And within a couple of weeks, we're going to be launching, if you have a mortgage on your product, on your home, we'll allow you to exit that product. So that's a new feature that we're adding in. Another feature we're going to be adding in soon thereafter that is people who own income properties, we're going to enable them to provide a dividend on the token so that there's going to be a double income stream there. And then we've got other features that we're going to be launching down the road as well. VCs and our angel investors, we purposely sought out individuals and firms that would add value from a strategic business perspective. People who are going to roll up their sleeves with us, tap into their network, help us network the business, help us with the next round of financing, help us with business problems that we're having. And that's what we've got. Woodstock is a perfect example of a VC that brings value to the table. They support us. They go to events with us. I was just recently at an event with Abhinav at the W3 Imagination in Action conference, which is one of the premier Web3 conferences that take place in the United States, where they actually literally bring all the top thought leaders together. They partner with Forbes magazine. It's a phenomenal event, and we're going to be doing it again in San Francisco. They come all the way from Dubai to support us for events like that, and they're constantly helping us with our business. Frontiers Capital is another example of a VC that's brought a lot of value to the table. They brought in Redwood Trust, which is the third largest REIT in North America, as a partner and investor in the business as well. Frontiers Capital is an amazing Bay Area firm that's focused on W3 and leading edge technology, what I like to refer as bleeding edge technology. So again, partners that work with us and help us build our business are the type of people we're looking for. We did the same thing with our angel investors. We have angel investors on our platform that are either really deep into the financing side of the equation. They know a lot of other venture capital firms, or they're actually builders and developers themselves. So they understand the space. They understand the struggles that new home builders are sort of facing and have to deal with as time moves on, because there's a lot of very fundamental issues that are taking place in the home building segment as well, where it's not just an issue of home prices going up because of inflation and other issues. It's at the very basic level, there's a issue with raw materials, and there's also an issue a lot of people don't talk about. There's an issue with people. Like, there's not enough carpenters, not enough plumbers, so there's a people issue that's affecting supply. And if you look at the number of units being built on an annual basis since, I think, going back to 2000, there is a sort of 5 million, I think, missing the mark of new homes that need to be built. That's pretty significant in terms of homes that are not being built. And that, again, drives prices up. And affordability is one of the issues that to us is significantly important. How can we make homes more affordable to people? And our solution does address that. And it's one of the features we are going to be launching in 2023. Is how do you help a new homeowner, someone who has not necessarily bought a home before, buy into a home and then potentially own that home with no mortgage ever? That dramatically affects your cash flow, dramatically affects what you can afford to buy. And suddenly this issue of home affordability may not be as big a problem if we're allowing people to actually come in, have no debt, no mortgage, and then partner with investors and own an asset. And I think that has the potential to change this paradigm of home ownership. Do I always need to own 100% of my home? Or maybe I own 25% of a home here and 25% of a home somewhere else, never actually owning 100% of an asset. But I do have the residential rights to that asset because I'm considered the homeowner under the Vesta Equity platform.
Absolutely. It's great, and it's very fascinating how we're trying to change the entire paradigm of home ownership. And like you mentioned, right, a lot of, I think, I am really interested with a lot of different things that you're planning with regards to usage of your funds and how does the road ahead look like. So I just like to take it from there. I think there are certain key parameters which are important for the long-term success of any project. Be it the founders, their experience, the team, community, the kind of traction you get, the timing you enter into the market, and there are a lot more. So if you can talk about how do you envision the growth and future of Vesta Equity in the next couple of years?
Well, in the next couple of years, it's a big industry. So I get asked this question a lot, and it's an industry that's significant in size. When I start talking billions of dollars, I get uncomfortable because that's a lot of money. This industry is trillions of dollars. Just the untapped equity sitting in North America alone is in the tens of trillions of dollars. That's equity with no debt. That's people who have homes who don't otherwise access that equity because they don't want to go into debt and they don't want to sell the property. Now, suddenly we're providing a means to access that equity debt-free, which when you think about it, you could be taking a lot of cash and pumping it back into the economy because that's cash that sits there, it's inactive, right? And capitalism is about the free flow of capital. And this is capital that's locked because institutional barriers are blocking it from getting it out into the economy. So as far as where this company could go, it could be, in a company that's in the billions and billions of dollars of revenue. I have to caveat that you're not supposed to make too many forward-making statements when you're doing these things, but it has the potential because the market's significant.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see a dramatic change in home equity financing. I think we're going to see a dramatic change in the concept of home ownership. There's also a generational issues that you got to look at. I think when you start getting into younger millennials and younger Generation Z, I think they're less concerned about traditional models of home ownership. I think they're more inclined to say, hey, yeah, I would actually love to actually own 25% of a home here and 25% of a home over there, and then maybe take my other funds and invest in other homes, but just own small percentages of those homes. It's a real different way of looking at home ownership and looking at that asset class in a completely different way, as opposed to I got to own it outright and 100%. So the potential is significant. I think we will see many different types of offers out there. I don't think banks are going to disappear. I don't think the idea of a mortgage is necessarily going to disappear 100%. I do think banks are going to become more conservative in who they lend money to and the amounts of money they're lending out to. You're already starting to see neighborhoods in the United States where they won't lend any money because it's not big a deal enough. And, $200,000 home, not worth their while, not worth the paperwork. Well, if you start taking $200,000 homes and look at how many there are in the United States, that's a lot of capital.
Yeah.
But the banks don't necessarily want to fund those anymore. So players are going to have to step in and fund those things. I think what you are going to see is you're going to start seeing a lot more transparency in the marketplace, which means more equitable type of offerings out there. One thing that I don't like when I see inequitable offerings is they're not fair to the homeowner. And I find a lot of homeowners get forced into these offerings because they are not given necessarily the chance to get out there and educate themselves. And that's something that's very close to us and close to our heart, that we want to force the industry to be far more equitable. I mean, even if you look at a mortgage and a compounding effect of interest, you take a $344,000 home over a 20-year mortgage at 5%, you end up paying almost $166,000 just in interest. That's not that equitable when you think about it. It's $166,000 of money you could use somewhere else. So that's not an equitable arrangement for the homeowner. And then there are other types of term loans out there where the homeowners are being put into positions where they're being forced to take a significant depreciation on the value of the house. And then when that loan comes to term, they're back to point A. They got to sell the house or come up with the money because it's termed. We have no terms on our arrangements. So you sell the equity in your home, and that equity is owned, the appreciation and the future value of that equity is owned by the investors, and they're in it with you. When you sell your house, the funds get dispersed to them. Or if you decide not to sell your house, there's a secondary market that we've built out where they can trade those assets to other investors. And that is a more equitable solution for homeowners than traditional models that are out there. So I think we're going to see a big change in that regard, which is why I think we've got companies like Redwood Trust backing us. We got companies like Woodstock backing us. We got other VCs out of Canada like OPN backing us, because they see that's exactly where the market's going to go.
Absolutely. And in a market or maybe in a business which is so huge, involving, like you mentioned, right, tons of money, and with the changing market scenario, you need to, I really like how you put that equitability and ensuring that, yes, we try to bring a lot of other people who are not able to reach up to this level, have an equitable home ownership and home equity financing options as well. I think that's a really great path to move ahead as well.
Yeah. And if you look at the investor side of the equation, there hasn't been a lot of choice for them either in this space. If you look at the last financial crisis that happened, and the financial crisis was very much in and around real estate. Yeah. The lack of transparency for a lot of investors meant that even a lot of big funds ended up losing a lot of money because they purchased these mortgage-backed securities that have been classified as AAA when the vast majority of them were not AAA. Very small percentage were AAA. And a lot of retirement funds and a lot of people ended up losing a lot of money as a result of that. So that lack of transparency and lack of inequitability also happens on the investor side too. And you get a very very small group of people, and I hate saying this, but Wall Street insiders that end up making tons of money on this, even when other people are losing. And that, I think, is going to fundamentally change over the next 10 years.
Absolutely. And that is going to be one fundamental shift that we see in this space, which is going to take this from billions to trillions and to furthermore tons of money flowing into this space as well. Very
Exactly.
interesting times ahead. Even in such bear markets, we do see a lot of builders building, and continuous work is being done in coming up with efficient protocols, solving for various use cases. So to take that forward, what are some of the other real life use cases being solved by blockchain technology that you are bullish on and foresee them making a considerable impact in this space?
Well, there's tons. I mean, one area where I'm fascinated, and at the W3 Imagination and Action conference I attended in Boston, there's a lot of issue and talk around health, because that's an industry where it's still, even though they're using leading edge technology in the treatment of individuals, the whole data side of it is still super backwards, right? Doctors still run around with paper files. And there's reasons for it. There's privacy issues and stuff like that. Blockchain actually addresses that, right? Because you can get and use blockchain in such a way to codify those records and provide access to those records, not actually put the records on the blockchain, the actual data, but enable access. So that access would become like the transaction. And you'd know the doctor accessed your records because you would own those records. Those records would be yours. And you would know the doctors access those records, and you could provide access to those records, and you would know you provided access to those records. And those records could also be anonymized so that the grouping of the data could actually be accessed by artificial intelligence. So let's say there was a platform that needed to access cancer cases. Well, you would know as the owner of that data that your data was accessed, it was anonymized, and actually used to potentially come up with remedies or solutions, or focus in on trends or particular issues in and around these types of cancers that people are having, which could lead to treatments. So that's one area that I find absolutely fascinating, because that has huge potential for benefiting humanity, making the administrative end of the healthcare system, which is where I think healthcare systems globally get bogged down on. There's lots of inefficiencies and there's lots of data out there that it's all over the place, still on paper, some of it's digital, but still at the end of the day, still pretty chaotic. The other fascinating area is also in supply chain and logistics. People don't realize this, but a lot of those elements are being put on the blockchain. And when you think of it, all the transactions that happen during the shipment of goods from one part of the world to the other is massively significant. And there's different rules, different regulations, and talk about an industry that's highly regulated. So that's also an interesting application for blockchain. The issue of provenance too. Is this good the real thing? Is this olive oil really from that olive oil farm in Greece? That's another way. And wines. So there's a massive amount of fraud in that space for food, luxury goods, cars. And then even when you think of it, when you start getting to things more serious, like plane parts, I can't remember the statistic I read, but it's a disturbing number where something like a certain percentage of plane parts are actually bootleg parts. They're not actually a real part that the plane or the manufacturer actually wanted in the plane. So when you think of it, you're talking about safety. You certainly don't want bootleg parts in a plane because the repercussions could be serious. So stuff like that, I think, is absolutely fascinating, and blockchain can solve those problems. There's also the whole idea of how could blockchain be added into politics in terms of democracies? How can it be leveraged in terms of the voting process? It is a immutable record. So if you do know that person's identity and that identity has been established and put onto the blockchain and they're voting, you know it's a legitimate vote. So there's issues like that as well. It could have a significant impact. I don't think Western democracies are quite ready for that yet. And as you see the struggles right now in the US currently with voter registration and whatnot, but if they start looking at things like this, they could actually start really creating true democracy where one vote counts and you know that one vote is that person. So that's a great application. So those are some of the things I look at, and I'm just in awe of what the potential is massively significant.
Definitely. And I really agree with all of those pointers. I think there is a lot of potential where these are very, very basic cases that we see day in, day out, right? And with
Yeah.
so many inefficiencies in the current operation of all of these things, be it healthcare or supply chain logistics and so on and so forth, and these industries involving tons and tons of data, which is just all over the place, not being put to use the way it should be, which I think blockchain really puts it to the correct use, simplifies things in a manner which will have just unlimited potential into how we can utilize this data in the best way possible. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's going to be very
100%.
interesting to see how this pans out. One last bit before we wrap up. So markets have been in a turmoil, but there is a strong belief that we need to trust the technology and the people building behind it. So what is your view on the current market scenario, and how do you see things progressing from here on?
I think every new industry has their ups and downs, and this one happens to be coinciding with some economic issues that governments unfortunately have handed to us with, printing of money and to an excessive extent, and debts and government debt and whatnot. So I fully expect that. I mean, we have it in any industry, and it weeds out the bad players, and there are bad players out there. If you're going to create a hedge fund that's crypto based, well, do it properly. If you don't do it properly, you're going to get caught, and eventually something's going to happen. So I think this is part of the process. The technology is sound. There are sound players out there. One of the reasons why we're working with Valgrind is because they're incredibly legitimate, incredibly conscientious about the product they've created. Sylvia McCallie is an awesome individual, MIT Turing Award winner. That's the type of people that are building a real legitimate future for blockchain. And one of the reasons why we've partnered with companies like that. So I expect it to thrive. I expect it to ride the bumps that we're going to experience. I hope to see a lot of elimination of these absolutely insane, art-oriented NFTs where people are paying exorbitant amounts of money for ridiculous concepts that they have no rights to. Now, it's unfortunate because an NFT can be legitimate in the respect that if it imbues rights to the new owner that are codified properly, and they actually own that art and can actually make revenue off that art, and they have rights to the art to display it, print it, do whatever they want, even though it's a digital asset, that to me is legitimate. But when someone's buying an NFT, it's this cute little GIF and they're spending a ton of money, and that GIF is completely reliant on the creator turning it on or off. Yeah. What have you really bought? And the whole metaverse 2 thing is a space that we've got to be really careful about, because that could be wrought with tons of fraud. My skin the hairs on the back of my neck just rise up when I hear that someone has spent $1 million on a metaverse property. I'm like, what have you bought? You can't live there, and what's the point of it? Yeah. I mean, I'd love to be a fly on the wall. Husband comes home to the wife, hey, honey, I bought a new $1 million home. It's by the ocean. And she's like, fantastic. And he's like, here, put these goggles on. And you can actually see it. My God, I mean, people who do that are just absolutely out of their minds. So those are the things that are part and parcel of any new industry. We're going to ride through those silly things and those silly applications. And I think over time, common sense prevails, proper use cases prevail, solid business ideas prevail. And, that's what we're about. We're about taking a real asset, which is a physical property, digitizing and creating an opportunity for the homeowner and investors. And to me, those are the type of businesses that survive. And, not that I'm trying to ping W3 imagination and action all the time, but that's what they're about. They're about real use case. And that's one of the reasons why I love that, because you go to a lot of these big industry events and there's a lot of fluff out there. Yeah. And the fluff is part of the ecosystem, and unfortunately part of what we have to, wade our way through. But I definitely see a bright future for blockchain, and it is got the potential to create Web3 from so many different perspectives. We didn't even touch on IoT and how Web3 can impact, the Internet of Things, but there's a huge opportunity there.
Absolutely. And I think this is the time when you take a step back, you see, okay, that there's so much happening in the ecosystem, things are moving too fast. And like you said, yes, there's a lot of fluff around it as well, which then makes you realize, okay, how are we working on the actual real life use cases? How are we leveraging the technology to its best use case, bringing the most out of it? And then all of these go as part and parcel of growing the ecosystem as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I really wouldn't want to stop the conversation, but with that, I think I would wrap up this conversation on a very high note. It was lovely speaking with you. There is some exceptional work being done by Vesta Equity team in providing simplified home equity financing options. Vesta Equity is definitely an innovator at the intersection of real estate, financial services, investing, and blockchain technology. And we wish you all the success for growing the business to greater heights. Thank you once again, Michael, for being a part of CuratedX and sharing some very useful key insights with us today.
I've really enjoyed it, and continue the good work getting W3 out there, expand your audience, and hopefully we'll be able to connect at Decipher in Dubai in November. Look forward to it.
Absolutely, absolutely.